Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Harmon Museum's Lunch and Learn for September. I'm John Zimkus, the Education Director and Historian here at the Harmon. There's a lot going on, and I thought I'd tell you a little bit about that, so you might mark your calendars. Currently in our Semendinger Gallery, there is a traveling exhibit on the Harlem Renaissance, which we have added to. As you may know, the Harlem Renaissance 100 years ago was the first major look at African American art, and the match which ignited that actually came from Lebanon. William Elmer Harmon, the man we're named after, established the Harmon Foundation. And he, in the early 1920s, started giving cash awards to African-American artists, to writers, a whole slew of different categories. And that cash award of several hundreds of dollars, worth several thousands of dollars today, really sparked the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. And so we have the exhibit, which is traveling, and it really has been emphasized more and become more relatable with the exhibit we've added to it. So it's worth your while. And with your ticket to come through our Lunch and Learn, the museum is free, so you can go see that with no problem. Go down the ramp, turn to the right. The elevator is on the right. It's where the picture of a train is. Press floor 1, and it'll open up right to the exhibit. One of the neat things in that is a silent film from 1933, a short film about the Harlem Foundation giving out the awards. Mr. Harmon had passed away a few years earlier than that, but you'll see his wife and his daughter and some of the art. And one of the neat things, I think, is it's a picture of the 1933 program for that exhibit, and we have that program and several other programs on display as part of our addition to that special exhibit. By the way, the exhibit is leaving on October 4th. So if you're not be able to see it today, you only have about another week or so to see it. We're gonna have ghost walks beginning October 3rd, Friday and Saturday at 7 o'clock. There is a fee going all the way through October and actually going on November 1st. So each weekend, contact the Historical Society about the fees for that and any other information. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about ghosts, we have ghost hunts where we're going to have a paranormal organization have 3 visits. They're going to visit to our Harmon Museum. They're all going to be in the evening from 10 until 12:30. They're October 17th, 24th, and 25th. So contact, there is a limited number of people who can be involved in that, and the fee for that is $35. Also on October 4th, a lot going on. We have at the cabin, the Beetle Cabin, cider press going on, a cider press, and we're going to make cider for the youngsters from 10 to 12:30 and talk about living in Pioneer, Ohio. So that is something you might be interested in. Also that day from 11 to 2 here, the Lebanon Garden Club and the Harmon Museum are getting together to have a talk by John Jury Lloyd, who is leaving his previous location of the Mount Hope Cemetery in Covington, Kentucky, and coming to us to talk about his involvement in botany and in medicine and pharmacy. And it should be pretty interesting. I think you'll enjoy that. Going back to September, Wednesday, September 25th, the Artscape will have Martina Sellerin, 3D weaving expert, give a presentation. If you would like to get tickets for that, contact Artscape at their website. And on October 17th, after our Harlem Renaissance exhibit is gone, we're going to have the Art We Create by the Arts Alliance, emphasizing painters. And there will be a reception that night, and they will be here through November. So it is something you might want to get involved in that. As far as lunch and learns go, we have a lot of exciting things. October 15th, our next one, 2 weeks before Halloween, over 100 years of Halloween collectibles. Our good friend Linda Martin will once again share her fantastic collections of holiday artifacts. On October 19th, Sue Watts will be talking about connections of how things in history not only affected what they were doing, but also affected other things, how they led. Yes, Jeannie. That would be, did I say October? Yeah. November 19th. Thank you so very much, Jeannie. December 17th, I'll have the privilege of talking to you about Thomas Corwin. Thomas Corwin, a contemporary of Henry Clay and Daniel Webster. During his lifetime and for the most of the 19th century, highly thought of, sort of forgotten today. But we'll be talking about his fantastic life, what a resume this man had, governor of the state, U.S. Senator, Congressman, Secretary Treasury of the United States, and also one of Lincoln's pallbearers at his funeral in Washington, D.C. And we'll be talking about that near the 160th anniversary of his death in Washington. He died in 1865. January 21 of 2026, Ormsby McKnight Mitchell, quite a Renaissance man. You may not know the man. You may have heard of Fort Mitchell, Kentucky. It's named after him, although they misspell his last name. There's only one L. Born in Kentucky, grew up in Lebanon. He helped survey the Little Miami Railway. He graduated from West Point, stayed there, and became a professor of mathematics while he was barely 20 years old. He helped design and build the Cincinnati Observatory, third largest telescope in the world being built in Cincinnati, and also went back to fighting in the Civil War. And Pam Adams will be our speaker that day. On February 18th, only 6 days after his birthday, we'll have Abraham Lincoln here. It's his 217th birthday, would have been 6 days earlier, and he looks good. He will be here. The gentleman's name is John Cooper. He is from Columbus. I have heard nothing but fantastic things about what kind of presentation he gives. So it is one I think you will really, really want to enjoy. You'll have a good time. So there's a lot of exciting things going on here at the Harmon Museum. So take advantage of the free admittance to the museum. There is a discount at the gift shop we have, so take advantage of that and enjoy our lecture today. We'll have our speaker in about a half hour or so. Welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, to the Harmon Museum's Lunch and Learn for September. I'm John Zimkus, the Education Director and Historian. We are very, very lucky to have a very special guest give us a presentation on our Lunch and Learn. Before I introduce her, I want to really thank Joyce Lovins Browning. Joyce has always been so helpful in bringing so many important guests to our Lunch and Learns. Joyce grew up in Harrison, Ohio, currently lives in the Millville area for the last 48 years. She retired in 2018 from the Great Parks of Hamilton County as a naturalist coordinator. And she just recently retired last year from the Amazing Travel Treasures as a tour coordinator. She considers herself I'll say this, right? Histolorian. Almost sounds like a DeLorean, the car, but a histolorian. Well, you do travel back in time. History, stories, legends, and lures from these fascinating ladies. Joyce has helped us get Mary Cunningham, who I'm thinking about having coming back, a famous grave robber who had a thing to help people in their education. She helped medical students find cadavers to experiment on. Mary Ingalls Draper, who was kidnapped by the Indians in the mid-18th century and had a terribly long and enduring trip back to her home. Martha Washington, Julia Dent Grant, Lottie Moon. Now, Lottie Moon was a spy for the Confederates who lived for a while in Oxford, Ohio. And I'm going to ask our guest who grew up in Oxford whether or not they ever met. Annie Oakley and many, many others. Today we are privileged to have Carolyn Lavina Scott Harrison. I went to Miami University, and every time I would go uptown to the Boar's Head or the Purity or any other bar back then, I would always go past Carolyn Scott Harrison. It was the headquarters for the DAR. I think it may have been her home. I'm not quite sure, but I would walk past that. Of course, she was the wife of the President of the United States, but she was also the first president of the DAR. This is not her first time here in Lebanon. She was here on August 7th of 1883, when she accompanied her husband, and he gave a speech at our fairgrounds just up the hill. One thing I want to add before I introduce our speaker. You know, in many ways, Joyce is sort of like Superman in the old TV series. Clark Kent knew how to get Superman, but you never saw Clark Kent and Superman together at the same time. And I must confess, I've never seen Joyce and the great speakers she has brought before us at the same time. Well, enough of that. Ladies and gentlemen, my great pleasure, First Lady of the United States, Carolyn Scott Harrison.
Can't have enough taverns, I suppose, especially in a college town. So Papa and Mama settled there. Papa built Mama a beautiful home that was more reminiscent of some of the homes back in Pennsylvania. And it was considered one of the best homes there in Oxford. And when Papa came to teach here, there was also a few other instructors there. Actually, the president of the college was Robert Bishop, and he was an ordained Presbyterian minister. And there was also William McGuffey. The three of them were kind of a dynamic trio in a way of teaching. They were all three Presbyterian ministers. And so it was not just a school of higher education, but it was a school of moral education. And they prided themselves on that. And that is the place where I grew up. Now, my mother was also a teacher before she got married. My mother enjoyed the arts, and so therefore I learned how to play the piano. We would often play duets together and entertain some of the children at the places where we were. And I had an older sister, Elizabeth, a younger sister, Mary, and then two younger brothers, John and Henry. And so we had a happy home. I remember having very good, happy memories growing up in Oxford. But as all good things come to an end, so they say, it was around the time I was just becoming a teenager. Things were starting to change in Oxford a little bit. More and more students were enrolling. More and more students from southern states were enrolling. And Oxford being so close to the Ohio River, it was very, very much involved in the Underground Railroad. Now, the Presbyterian Church, there was a Hopewell Church, is what it was called. It had been started in Oxford when Oxford was first beginning. And it began to kind of fracture. It got such a large congregation that they had sister churches around. And some of them were known as the New Thinkers and the Old Thinkers. The Old Thinkers were those who thought that slavery would just dissolve on its own, that they shouldn't get involved. They didn't believe in slavery, but they did not want to take part in it. Now, the New Believers were more like they were abolitionists. It had to end, and it had to end now. And that was my father's thinking, and that was Dr. Bishop's thinking. But Mr. McGuffey had a different idea. He was one that didn't want to get involved. And this caused friction between the three of them, where they had all been best friends and raised their families and everything's together. It was starting to get a little uncomfortable. And that is when Mr. McGuffey decided to leave. He left to teach in Cincinnati, and then eventually he went on to Ohio State. Now, my father, being pretty much of an abolitionist feeling, when Dr. Bishop was demoted, they decided to replace Dr. Bishop with a pro-Southern president of Miami University. His name was George Junkin. And George Junkin, my father did not think very highly of. He was very upset at the fact that they were replacing Dr. Bishop. And so when an offer came in for Father and Mr. Bishop to teach at Farmers College, they took it. Now, Farmers College was in Cincinnati. I believe these days they call it College Hill. And so Farmers College, Father became a professor again of mathematics and science, and he had a lot of young male students. One particular young man came to the house quite often. He wanted extra work. He wanted to be tutored by my father. And his name was Benjamin. Benjamin Harrison, that's where I first met him, was there at Farmers College. And when he no longer needed tutoring of any sort, he still kept coming around. And we had become best friends. We would sit on the porch and we could talk for hours. We had the same ideals and the same thoughts and the same goals in life. And so Benjamin had come from a very large family. And I guess you could say it was his family that pretty much was instrumental in my family being in Oxford to begin with. Because Benjamin, he was also known as a very serious young man, was the grandson of William Henry Harrison, the 9th President of the United States. And his father, John Scott Harrison, was a congressman. So Benjamin was always taught by his mother and grandmother to have high morals and to live up to the Harrison name. Now, his grandmother, her name was Anna Sims Harrison, and her father was John Cleves Sims. He was an early pioneer in this area. And so it wasn't just Benjamin's paternal family, but also his maternal family. Because when the Sims Purchase was given, he was given 1 million acres. And he was supposed to set aside some land for higher education. And that became Miami University. Now, Benjamin's family, the Harrison family, they came from Virginia. In fact, they were in Virginia around Jamestown in the early beginnings, which was known as the Starving Time. That was when the first Harrison came over. Now, he came from Berkeley Parish in England. And in Berkeley Parish, there was a whole bunch of men that came over at that time. So when he built his plantation and became successful, he named it Berkeley Plantation. And that is where William Henry Harrison was born. He was born there prior to the Revolution. And it was his grandfather, which was another Benjamin, that was the signer of the Declaration of Independence. So at 8 years old, during the Revolutionary War time, William was growing up during all these influential men that was coming to the house. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all these gentlemen. In fact, the first presidents of the United States all would come to Berkeley Square. And during the Revolution, it was even attacked by the British forces led by the traitor Benedict Arnold. Yes. It was raided, the animals were slaughtered, a lot of the things were stolen because of what it was. But the Harrison family had had enough advance warning that they were able to get away. So that worked out well. Now, John Cleves Sims was also a Revolutionary War soldier. He was in the Continental Army. His wife, they had 2 daughters. And shortly after Anna was born, she was the second daughter born, shortly after she was born, his wife passed away. And being in the Continental Army, he could not take care of his daughters. But his parents lived in Long Island, New York, which was British held at the time. So what did he do? He disguised himself as a British soldier and smuggled his 2 young daughters into his parents' home, where they raised his 2 oldest daughters. And so it was that Anna had the most advantages of a good education. And after the Revolutionary War, in New York was the first capital where George Washington and Martha moved with their 2 grandchildren. And so Anna was a classmate of Martha Washington's granddaughter, Nellie. So she lived with her grandparents until she was about 19. Her oldest sister had married the first governor of Kentucky, Mr. Short. And so her sister was living in northern Kentucky at the time. And John Cleves Sims was staying with his daughter for a while until he could have his house in North Bend built. And so Anna, when she came out to visit her father and sister in Kentucky, there was a young soldier there. He was just walking guard, but his name was William Henry Harrison. Now, William, of course, when he was like the 3rd born son of the Harrison family. He first studied medicine in Philadelphia. But at age 18, his father passed away. And as you know, as a 3rd born son, that took all the money for his education away. And so he decided to join the military. His first assignment was to General Anthony Wayne in Ohio and Kentucky area. And so when Anna met him, her father, Judge Sims, was like, "Nuh-uh-uh, you're not gonna be with some ordinary soldier. I forbid it. You have to end this relationship now." But of course they didn't. They met in secret and they wed in secret. And Judge Sims didn't find out until later that the Harrison family was far less prestigious than his own. It had to be a very happy marriage because they had 10 children. William Henry Harrison was made governor of the Indiana Territory, where he built a mansion called Grouseland because of all the grouse, the little birds that was there. And it is there where most of their children were born, 8 out of 10, I believe. And his son, John Scott Harrison, which was Benjamin's father, when he was an infant, they said that William Henry Harrison had a thing about having a lot of mirrors in his room. He always wanted to make sure there was nobody behind him that was going to sneak up on him. And so when he was holding the baby, John Scott, there at the window one time, a stray bullet came through and almost hit his son. And it was there, and during the War of 1812 and the Indian issues that they were having with Tecumseh and the Prophet, that he decided to take his family back to Ohio, to North Bend, and have Anna stay with her father, Judge Sims. So that is how the Harrison family came to be back in North Bend in Ohio. So, what brought Ben to Miami University? Well, when my father got the teaching position back at Miami, Ben was still at Farmers College, and I had started in the new Female Institute in Oxford, where my mother was also teaching. And Ben decided that he didn't want to be separated from me, so he transferred to Miami University. Unfortunately, his mother had recently died and had passed away at a young age. And he had lost 2 younger brothers as well. And so he was serious before, but he was a lot more serious and subdued when he came to Miami. And we still carried on our conversations. In fact, because we could sit and talk on the front porch for hours, some of his friends called him the moonlight serious, or pious moonlight dude. That was a name that they dubbed him because he did not like to partake in any of the shenanigans that the other younger students would do, you know, some of the little tricks that they would do, or go serenading to some of the young ladies at the female college. There was one time that Ben did join in, and he thought it would be interesting. They had a professor who had a rain gauge on the top of one of the buildings, and every time it rained, he was meticulous in charting how much rain was there. So they thought it would be great fun to get up there on the roof and pour extra water in the rain gauge. And of course, Ben was elected to do that. He got up there to do so, and there was a commotion of some sort. Somebody dropped something, but anyway, the professor came out, which stranded Ben on the roof for several hours, and that was the end of that. He didn't want any more part of the shenanigans of the other college boys. But like I said, we got along quite well, and when it came time for graduation, Ben graduated first. Actually, Ben was a little younger than I was, not quite a whole year, but a good 8 months younger than I was. But he graduated first, and he wanted to go to Cincinnati to get a law degree. His father had been a lawyer, and he wanted to be a lawyer too. And so I stayed behind because I wanted to finish my degree in arts and music. And so Ben went to Cincinnati. And he was working to be accepted into the Ohio bar. And after my graduation, I started teaching. I started teaching down in northern Kentucky for a while. There had been one of the ladies that had started the first school for girls in Oxford. Her name was Bethania Bishop, and she was married to Dr. Bishop's son. And when he passed away at an early age, she started teaching down there. So I went down to help her because she had been my teacher. And that is where I got pneumonia. I got pneumonia, which weakened my lungs, and got to a point where I had to go back home to Oxford. Now, Ben at this time came to visit me, and he thought for a fact that if we got married, I would be well. I thought it was a great idea. My father, however, did not. But he soon was reconciled to the idea, and Ben convinced him that he could take care of me and that everything would be fine. And so we were married in our home there at Scott House, and my father was the presiding minister. Now, when we were first married, Ben's father, John Scott Harrison, had been elected to Congress, and he needed to go to Washington. But Ben's mother had died, and he still had some younger siblings still at home. And so in our first part of our marriage, we went to Point Farm. Point Farm was the farm that the Harrisons had built there on the Ohio River in Cleves, Ohio. So we went and stayed with Ben's younger siblings until the time when his older brother, Erwin, could come home and take care of the responsibility while his father was away. And that is what we did. That's how we started out our marriage. And Ben passed the bar by the time he was 21. And he could have went and got a good job there in Cincinnati. The Harrison name would have opened up a lot of doors. But Ben wanted to make his own way. And so he wanted to go to Indiana, and Indianapolis is where he wanted to go. Now, there was a big demand in Indiana at this time for lawyers, and he just knew he could find work. So we pulled up stakes and moved to Indianapolis. I was expecting our first child. And I have always been a bit on the fragile side with my health, so my first pregnancy was not going well. So what do you want when you're not feeling well? You want to be with your mother. I went back to Oxford to deliver our firstborn son, Russell Benjamin. And Ben worked hard to get a partnership in Indianapolis. And so when I came back, it was a few more years, 4 more years before I had our daughter. We named her Mary. We called her Mamie for short. That was her nickname. And then Ben got a partnership. All things were going well. We actually built a home on Dayton Street there. And most of the homes were closer to the road, but I told Ben, no, I wanted ours to sit further back. I wanted a nice white picket fence and a good wraparound porch, which is what we did. It was during this time, though, that the rumblings of war between the states was starting, and I was expecting our 3rd child. So when war broke out, Ben did not go right away. And unfortunately, that summer, our daughter was born stillborn. And it was after that that I got involved with the Sanitary Commission, a lot of charities, an orphanage there in Indianapolis. I did a lot of work, not only taking care of our 2 children, but devoting myself to a lot of charity work. And Ben then, after a year, he was tasked with getting a troop together from Indiana, and they wanted him to be the leader, but he felt like, even though there was military history in his background with his grandfather, he didn't feel qualified to be the leader of this unit. So he declined at first. He drilled with the men. He was a soldier during the day, and at night he read up on being a leader of these men, which of course he became, and by the end of the war he had become a brigadier general in 1865. But it was the Battle of Peachtree Creek that he distinguished himself by leading the charge and winning the battle. And so therefore he was known as a hero during that time. Now I got to go and visit him once in a while in the camps. There was times when he got to come home for a short period of time. And one particular time, it was in September, and I remember it was right after that nasty little business of Morgan. There was a general, Confederate general, who came up through with a bunch of his riders through Ohio, and I believe they called it Morgan's Raid. Now, that also reminds me of a classmate that was a little older than I was. She was born and raised, or she wasn't born in Oxford, I don't believe, but she was raised in Oxford. Her name was Lottie Moon, and I knew she was a bit on the scandalous side, being an underclassman of hers. We heard all the good gossip. In fact, there was a gentleman by the name of Ambrose Burnside that she jilted at the altar before she married a lawyer from Hamilton, Ohio, by the name of James Clark. But that's another story. You'll have to talk to her. I understand she gives lectures now and then. But as the war came to an end, Ben was able to come back to Indianapolis. He resumed his law practice. He was also a court recorder and a court reporter, and he had other positions that he did. I continued with my charity work, and we were not blessed with any more children at that point. Ben decided to leave his family's political party of Whig, what that was, and join the new Republican Party. And he became a Republican. He ran for Congress for a couple of times before he finally won. And we went to Washington then for a short time. Now, our children were grown at this point, and during his last year as a congressman, I had some grandchildren, so I did not follow him to Washington at that point. And it was not long, of course, where they were like, he would make a good candidate for president. Now, we didn't even know that he had won the nomination to be president until we had hundreds of people show up on that nice big front yard that I had requested. And so it was then that Ben decided to have a front porch speeches. He was very eloquent in his speaking and everything. He was very good at impromptu speaking. And even though people thought he was a bit on the cold side or aloof side as a person, he was just reserved. But you get him talking, and he was just absolutely wonderful. And we would have hundreds of people show up. And even though, as a child, I didn't care for domestic type duties, but Mother insisted that I needed to run a household, and I'm so glad she did, because we began entertaining these groups. In fact, there was so many people trampled their way through my living room and everything that they wore out our carpet before the election. Another thing happened too that Ben was not very happy about, but after all these gatherings, we noticed that some of our pickets and our fences would be missing. And after each and every gathering or speech, there'd be more and more, until finally one person came up to Ben and asked him to sign it. Until there was nothing left but the gate. And he's like, well, you might as well take it down. So there went our picket fence that I wanted. So when Ben was elected, he was elected over Grover Cleveland. He did not win the popular vote. He barely missed the popular vote, but he won the electoral vote. And so Grover Cleveland and his pretty little young wife, Frances, left the White House, making room for us. And we moved in. My mother had passed away at this point, but my father was still alive, and living with us at the time. So Papa moved to the White House with us. And so did my daughter and her 2 children, because her husband was away for work. And even my son and his wife and children was going to move into the White House. So we had a large extended family in this tiny small home, which didn't have much at all that you would think that the President of the United States would have. It was filthy. It was absolutely filthy, and that was my first order of business. I had to clean this place up. It was so rat infested that in the upstairs hallway, they were on the tables that were up there. And in fact, one rat even got up on a bed with a visitor that we had. So I had a gentleman come in with ferrets to catch the rats, and I enlisted the help of an architect, and I wanted to have 2 big wings put on the side of the White House. I wanted a nice fountain in front. I wanted all this stuff to be taken care of because I thought that the home of the President of the United States needed to be prestigious. And it wasn't just for our family. It was for the families of the future. I believed a lot in history, and I believed in preserving it too. So what I did is I crawled up into the attics, and I went down into the moldy old basement, and we cleaned that thing from top to bottom. We renovated the kitchens, and of course they did not approve the architect's plans, but they did say they would give me enough money to renovate the place. So instead, I know that all previous presidential administrations, they would just take all the furniture out and bring in all new furniture, which to me I felt was kind of wasteful. We didn't need all new furniture, but there was a lot of things that was left behind by previous administrations. And some of that was china. And I wanted that china to be preserved and displayed. So there was display cases that I had made for all the other previous chinas. And in fact, I even designed our china, which of course, being an artist, I also gave china painting classes, which was very popular at the time. So when I was crawling around in all these dusty, dirty, moldy places, I developed a terrible cough, and Ben was like, "You're gonna get sick, you need to stay out of those places." And of course, I don't like to tell him he's right, but it's been lingering on, and I'm not too happy with that. But when I was up in the attic, I ran across this beautiful desk. It was a desk that I found out the history of. A long time ago, in the 1850s, there had been a British ship called the Resolute. It had gotten trapped in the ice. And a few years after that, an American brig came along and freed it from the ice. And instead of salvaging it, which would have been their right to do, they decided to have it totally refitted and sent back to Queen Victoria. She kept this ship for another 20 some odd years, and then it was going to be decommissioned. She's like, "I want desks made out of that timber of that." She had a desk made for herself, and she had a desk made for the current President of the United States, and shipped over. And so I wanted Ben to have the Resolute desk in his office, and I hope future generations will use it too. But as we were cleaning everything up and stuff, we had big state dinners, and my health was beginning to be a little on the iffy side. So my niece came to help with everything. Her name was also Mary Lord Dimmick. She was my sister's daughter, my oldest sister, Elizabeth. And so she came and helped. She became Ben's secretary and was answering all his correspondence as well. And as time went on, I was asked to help with other charities. Johns Hopkins University wanted me to raise money for their medical program, and I said I would, only if they started admitting women, which they consented to. We raised over $100,000 for that. Then, as you've heard of the Sons of the American Revolution, they used to have women in their organization, and then all of a sudden decided, no, they didn't want women in their organization. So they developed their own, called themselves the Daughters of the American Revolution. And since my own family had been former soldiers, and so had Ben's, they asked me to be the first residing president of their organization, which not too long ago, I gave the first speech at their convention. And speaking there, I got a little bit on the winded side as well. So I do know that I might have to slow down a little bit, but I really enjoy the grandchildren and having them around. We even have a pet goat by the name of Whiskers, and he has a cart, and he takes the grandchildren around the grounds all the time. I know I'm compared to Frances Cleveland. She's young, she's flashy, she's pretty. I'm known as more of the domestic type. I'm older, a little bit more matronly, but I don't want to be compared to her that much. So I do my best and try to do my best that I can, and I will continue to do that. But as my voice is getting a bit on the croakier side, I think I should stop our talking for now and our visit, and maybe when I'm better, I'll come back for a longer visit. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Harrison. Does anybody have any questions for the First Lady?
Yes, ma'am.
What years were you in the White House?
It was 1889 to 1892. Unfortunately, Caroline would not have had the opportunity to come back for a longer visit because she had developed tuberculosis. She passed away in the White House when she had gone to the Adirondacks for cooler temperatures. She was going to spend the summer there, and her condition turned terminal, and she wanted to come back to the White House. And it was during the time of Ben's reelection. So he did not campaign much. In fact, Grover Cleveland was his opponent at the time, and they both agreed that they would not do much campaigning during that time because of her illness. But she was the second First Lady to die in the White House. She was laid out there in the East Room. Her father was 90 years old at the time. She died in October. She died October 25th, I believe, just a few days after her wedding anniversary to Ben. And her father died less than a month later. So I figure, he was just, most of his kids were gone. He was ready to go too. So, yes.
DAR, what was since you're the first president, what goal did you have?
She wanted to make, preserve history. She thought that the things that we had, Ben was known as the Centennial President. He was sworn into office 100 years from George Washington. So it was kind of a nice administration time for them to be there and to start thinking about the preservation of the United States and different things. So one of her main goals, I do believe, was the preservation of history. So, yes?
Is your house still in Indianapolis?
The house still exists in Indianapolis. In fact, it's a museum, and a lot of her things are there. She also loved to write poetry. She was into watercolors. She was a very good painter. It was her love of flowers and orchids that she instituted orchids into all the state dinners and that type of thing. She wanted a conservatory built to have flowers and things, but They turned down her plans. Eventually, they put the wings on the side. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention. She was the first lady to have a Christmas tree in the White House. They decorated it for their grandchildren, and so the tradition started. And she also brought electricity to the White House for the first time. The family was so afraid of it that they would leave the lights on all day long, all night long, until a servant would turn them off because they were afraid to touch the switches.
You were talking about how at Miami University, her father and Dr. Bishop, a new president came in. Was his name Jenkins?
Junkin.
Junkins.
Yeah, George Junkin was, he was pro-Southern. He only lasted for 4 years before he was no longer president of Miami, and he went to the Virginia Military Academy where he taught young military soldiers just before the Civil War. And his daughter, Eleanor, ended up marrying one of his students, who was known as Thomas Jackson, later becoming Stonewall Jackson. So.
Well, there is a Bishop Hall at Miami. There is a Harrison Hall. There's a Scott Hall. There's no Junkins Hall.
There's no Junkin Hall, no. So he was not well tolerated after, because when he came in, the admissions declined so badly that there was hardly anybody trying to get into Miami University. So he only lasted 4 years.
Now, you were talking about the house. It's a beautiful house. It's been years since I've been there. It sort of stands out because it's, 21st century all around it, and here's this mid-19th century house. But there's some beautiful artwork in the house by Carolyn.
Yeah, she was a good artist and stuff. In fact, they said when she was a young girl, she loved poetry, she loved Shakespeare and different things like that. And she wrote, put all these poems in a book and illustrated all of them with flowers. And they say that even though the flowers and the watercolors are so faded, that book is in the museum up there. That's a day trip, sis. We got to go on. My sister, I drag her everywhere.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And we want to thank Joyce also.
Okay, I'll make sure she knows. Thank you.
Well,
And
don't
if
forget
anybody,
to tour the museum and visit the gift shop with a discount, and we'll see you next month.
I do want to point out that there is a book that was written by a DAR person, and it tells a big deal of her life. And that's a lot of what I based my talk on today. There's also a book of old homes in Oxford that has her home. Her original home in Oxford has been torn down, but they do believe that there was an underground railroad tunnel that went from her house to a house across the street. So whether she was part of that or not, we'll never know. Thank you all. Did I do okay? Whoops.